Welcome, everyone, to a workshop for the Eastham Zoning Task Force. I'm Mary Nee, Chair of the Task Force, and I appreciate everyone being here today. We have members of the Select Board as well as the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Board, and we have various other supporting staff and other committee members in attendance today. Delighted you're here. We're going to go through a lot of material. And I will say that we may find at the end of this, there's a schedule that has been distributed of the various public places that we will be discussing this plan. This group, because you will all be very central both to the policy making and the approval process of these zoning amendments, as well as the implementation, which is going to be substantial. If there's desire to have more time or another meeting, we can certainly do that. I will say that this room we're scheduled to stop at 5. This room is not booked again till 6. So if the Q&A needs to go over a little bit, we can sort of take the pulse of the room, because Paul and I can certainly stay. So with that, maybe Paul, I will have you advance the slide. Okay, I just want to recognize a few people here. The zoning task force, we've been in sort of operation for 4 years, but we've been looking at this particular topic for the last 18 months. And it is quite a lot of time. So I want to acknowledge my fellow task force members who've done a lot of work. Carolyn McPherson, she keeps the minutes for us. She's also the head of the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, and she's on the Strategic Planning Committee. Kevin Gatlin is a planning board member. We have Martin Ridge, who's a ZBA member. Pat Canavan, who's a planning board alternate. Lucky Pat, she's going to watch this when she comes back Sunday. She told me she's in Sicily right now, so wish we were with Pat.
Yeah.
But so I want to thank you all, and I just want to recognize a few of the support staff. Jackie O'Rourke is a recent newcomer to the planning department. She came in just as we were editing these documents, and we discovered one of her skills was she was a former English teacher. So she has really done a tremendous job with editing and organizing, so we really appreciate that. And as we were going along, Rachel Butler and Hillary Greenberg Lenos were very helpful in giving us information. And last but not least, we would not be here today without really enormous work that Paul Lagg has done. As you know, on committees, we can all have bright ideas, and then someone in the middle has to go track them down, get the information, come back, report. And Paul's been doing that with us for 18 months, as well as coordinating with all the other consultants, et cetera. So I really want to acknowledge Paul. He's done a tremendous amount of work. So as I said, the way we set this up today, we've sort of broken it up into 2 chunks. I'm going to speak for the first half of the meeting, or the first part of the meeting, to really give you the sense of what was our charge, how did we go about it, what was the information we used, sort of the background for how we came to recommendations. We would like to try to get that done, lost about 10 minutes, get that done as quickly as possible. We have coffee coming in from Dunkin' Donuts, so we want to take a 10-minute break after you've absorbed sort of like some of the big picture stuff. Get a quick cup of coffee. We'll come back. Paul is going to walk through all of the detail at sort of a high level. Again, as you will see through the documents, there's a lot of information here. This won't be the last conversation you'll want to have about this subject. So, and as I mentioned, at the end, we'll do some Q&A. Live, work, and play. Live, work, and play is a theme. Ted Grobitz, the consultant with this project, suggested this idea. And really, this idea comes from the concept, and you'll see that we wanted to look very comprehensively at all of the planning that the town has done, whether it's been about town center and tea time, wastewater, roadway improvements, housing plans, et cetera, and try to look at how we could meet multiple objectives that are part of the vision for Eastham and establish a regulatory framework for that. I will say as we go through this, it's important to note, aside from the properties that the town owns, this is all privately owned property. We are going to discuss a lot of potential opportunities. We are not land developers. We have studied land use to see how the land use and the regulatory system works with the vision of the town. We've asked the consultants to draw conceptual pictures. You're gonna see pretty pictures, and you're gonna see layouts, and you're gonna see housing plopped in a lot of places. That's not that we are saying that the potential and the capacity exists for these things. We're going to give you our rationale for why we think this might be a good land use strategy. However, we're not proposing that there be a 5-story building in such and such a place. We're not at that level. So again, the conceptual pictures give people a sense of the feel and the direction, but I don't want people to get wedded that, well, I don't know if we want to have that particular property at that particular site. It's not that specific. But we are trying to come up, and we think we have got a reasonable proposal to have a strategically planned, viable, walkable business district, embracing traditional New England architecture, minimizing environmental impact, promoting economic development and commercial growth, and creating affordable, attainable housing, all to sustain year-round activity where the community can gather to live, work, and play. And I think probably the most operative word that you'll come out of this presentation with is the concept of why is there a necessity to have year-round workforce and residents, and what are the challenges to getting the year-round workforce and residents. I'll also say that one of the major challenges, and this will come up process, is looking at land use and looking at creating a business district, a walkable business district, is enormously challenged by the fact that we have a 4-lane highway running through the center of town. So that is, I mean, it sort of goes without saying, but when you really start looking at land use, egress, curb cuts, et cetera, that 4-lane highway has impacts that we just try to take into account. So DCPC background. Some of this wording is literally cut and paste from the DCPC. So the DCPC was adopted by town in 2017. It was preceded by a year of planning in conjunction with the Cape Cod Commission. And so the objectives of the DCPC was to establish regulatory requirements that discouraged overdevelopment, commercial sprawl, and proliferation of formula businesses. There was a formula business that presented itself, I believe, somewhere around 2015. The town had a very adverse reaction to that and realized it didn't have the zoning to sort of protect itself from a particular formula business. So it engaged in the DCPC. Now we are at the point where, and also there was creating a walkable business district was also embedded in there. You have, I think, really early on, maybe on page 3 of the report, you will see, if you get to the current map of the DCPC, there are 6 sub-districts. There's core commercial, transitional commercial, limited commercial, office residential, is actually 7, residential, and the trade park. There is an embedded strategy that was part of the original decision-making for those 6 districts. And it's simply saying the strategy, again, going back to minimizing commercial sprawl, et cetera, was to, you'll see that the definitions for each of those districts has the most intense development in core commercial, and then it basically, and trade park, but core commercial, stepping down a bit to transitional, and then certainly stepping down when you get to limited and office residential, minimizing the commercial, emphasizing the residential. So that was sort of the embedded strategy there. We are not proposing that those intents be changed. So we've made no recommendations that those intents be changed. We are, however, and Paul will discuss this when he gets to his presentation, there are a couple places where the current district, well, one place, the tea time is not correctly zoned for the type, any kind of development that has been envisioned. So it is imperative that the tea time move to transitional commercial in order to absorb and support the visions that have been discussed. There are a couple other minor extensions of core commercial we think makes sense, and Paul will talk about those. They're highlighted on the page. Why do we need to update it right now? Again, just go back to the history. In 2017, that predated the strategic plan, town center plan, housing production plan, marketing plan, wastewater plan. It literally came before the town had done all of that planning. And so in many instances, the visions and the kinds of things that were laid out in those plans are not consistent with what the current DCPC provides. Secondly, I think regarding design, we have a statement in the current zoning code which speaks to this business district should reflect a traditional New England architecture, comma, see Cape Cod Commission's guidelines. That is the specificity that we have outlined in terms of the look and feel that we want. And so we obviously think that that needs more development. And a lot of what you see in our recommendations is sort of fleshing out what are the elements of a traditional New England village. And then I think finally, one of the things we are proposing here is there are two documents in your binder. One is the amendments to the zoning code, and then the other one is design regulations and procedures. We broke out elements between the code and the design guidelines because design rules and regulations can be adopted by the planning board after a public hearing and not require a very elaborate approval process. So in terms of giving the town flexibility, we've put many things in a separate document, separate from the zoning, which actually codifies and sort of makes things less flexible. I was kidding, I'm kidding with Bob coming in, and I should have mentioned, Bob Bruns was a member of the task force until May, until he moved up to the select board here, and he contributed quite a bit to the debate and discussion as to what would go forward. We had consultants, Brokers Associates, and Peter Flinker, and who was doing a lot of landscape and roadway analysis. Sarah Korjeff, who joined us, has represented the Cape Cod Commission. I want to acknowledge Sarah because she probably attended 2/3 of the meetings and is, gave us enormous support and very positive input. And one of the things we tried all along was, as we were going through these recommendations, was to bounce ideas off the commission, because ultimately we are going to have to bring this whole proposal to the commission. So we didn't want to do it all in isolation. So there's been a lot of work done on that part. Okay. Talking a little bit about process, I'm going to go through this really quickly. Typical zoning process requires planning board public hearing and approval, finance committee recommendation, select board approval to be on the warrant, and then ultimately town meeting. That's a typical zoning amendment. The DCPC requires presentations, not approval, being made to the Conservation Committee and the Board of Health. It also requires the Cape Cod Commission approval. So as you see in the schedule, we have scheduled a variety of meetings to do that. So that's different. We've also had requests from the Park and Residents Association and the Council on Aging. We have always participated in pre-town meeting. We do have a general community meeting scheduled for February 26th, I believe. We have been working, Jackie has been really helpful working, because what we want to do is we're trying to arrange a meeting in such a way that we can provide some childcare downstairs, so we can really get families here. So it's sort of in the works, but that's the target. And as we've noted, amending a DCPC involves a lot, not only in analysis, but also in process. So it's the kind of thing that we really should try to get it as right as possible, because it's a lot to, really make changes on this. Okay, we've been talking to a lot of folks. We did 25 meetings. These were open meetings. They are recorded. You can hear them all, as well as meeting with local businesses, developers, town planning. We had a charrette, which many of you had attended, and certain consultations with town council. What I will say is that I just note that town council generally, and sometime in February, once we get these zoning proposals advanced a little bit, does a very detailed review, a line by line review, and before they make a recommendation for what goes on the warrant. So Carolyn Murray has not done that line by line review, but we have been giving her information as we go along. And anytime we've tried to adopt something, even though we've seen it in another town, or it's showing up somewhere else, if we have a big concept here, whether it's top of the shop housing that we've talked about or certain other things, we've been running big ideas by Carolyn to be sure that we're solidly going. So far, many of the big concepts have been at least previewed with her, and she's been giving us a green light that we're set. I don't want to, she will have her final say, so I don't want to preempt that review, but we have been doing that. Plans and studies that we have looked at. I mentioned this, again, our current zoning code, strategic plan, master plans, market studies, housing production plans, and bylaws. We also got a tremendous amount of technical consultation. As we were going along, as I said, we've been working collaboratively with the Cape Cod Commission, so we've been bumping things over to them. Their technical experts have been able to give us some real-time input. One of the things, for example, that the new state zoning code, there were many things that were in zoning code that are now going to be in the new state zoning code. So we've been taking them out of our code, it's state law. And let me just say that I missed my point there. Our consultants, I'm recognizing consultants, we were collecting information from the Cape Cod Commission. There's a bibliography here, model village centers, bylaws from a dozen or so towns. And we're getting all of this information, and we were, as Bob can attest, each month we take something, whether it's dimensions or uses or something, and we kind of granularly go down and sort of debate and discuss each item against what were the plans, what were the objectives, and we're really kind of going through. All of that we asked the consultant in May to put together in an overall package. So the good news is we were getting all kinds of wonderful advice about all of these innovative things, but when the entire package came together, Paul, I would credit him, sort of raised his hand and said, "Oh my God, this is too much." It was, if you think what before you was a lot, it was 30% more. We basically spent August, September, October, November, kind of stripping out anything that we didn't think was germane to Eastham. Again, there were things, none of the big concepts, but just a lot of architectural detail, a lot of specificity. And, a combination of it wasn't totally applicable to Eastham. It was a bit of an overreach. And, and administratively would be very difficult to implement, both at a board level and a staff level. So I know it's a lot, but it's a lot less than it could be. You will see in the actual zoning code, the changes we are recommending are highlighted in blue. So everything you see in black is in this color. So you'll see there's an awful lot of what exists that has not been recommended for any change. Oh, you can feel free to jump in. Thanks. Okay. So, the market study. I read the market study a couple of years ago when we were starting to do certain things, like looking at the development task force, and I reread it for this thing. And I would strongly suggest it's done in 2021. It is a really good economic analysis. And so I would, it's a document you should read. And it basically looked at, what was different is we sometimes talk about the market. Who is the market? This study looked at what is the market of Eastham in terms of market capability and economics, with a little bit of sort of the Maurice end of Wellfleet and a little bit going into maybe Orleans around Stop and Shops. It wasn't really taking 3 towns, it was taking a little bit on the edge in all of our town. And it looked at the economics of, if you have this workforce, if you have this if you have this residential base, what can you achieve economically? And some of the highlights were dominated by small businesses. Some of this is, we're going to say things that everyone knows. It's been dependent on tourism and seasonal residents. We saw this in the study, and we saw this in feedback from local businesses. Insufficient workforce and lack of enough of a customer base that's living here year-round to support 12-month retail services. We're talking about the sort of small-scale retail that we'd like to see, the shops, the restaurants, and things like that. It is the biggest factor, workforce and a customer base to help them survive during those winter months when we're not having huge population boosts. There's a blue economy that was noted by the market study around environmental and marine-related items. That is that we have limitations, and we'll get to the trade park around opportunities there. Our current commercial properties are really getting very old, and I think one of the things to think about as we think about the visioning going forward is the age of these properties are such that many of the businesses are going to have to make, do I redevelop, do I sell? And we have a lot of family businesses, so that has a whole sort of generational kind of thing. In either case, selling or redevelopment is anticipated to pick up, because just literally because of the age of the buildings. And I also think that with the town owning 2 of the signature parcels and the town's movement to develop those, along with wastewater, if that happens, along with roadways improvements, which we will discuss, all of that is going to be an impetus, which will probably have folks taking a look at are we redeveloping, are we selling. But I will say, it's very important, and we said this in the report, if you're a current business and you want to continue to do what you're doing, there's nothing in this recommendation that mandates you do anything. If you want to do maintenance on your property, if you have interior improvements, and Paul will talk about it, and if there's some small scale, you want a patio or a shed or something like that, all of those things, you may be non-conforming with this proposal, but you are not mandated to make any change. Paul will also go through the situation of when you wish to redevelop, when these things kick in and what are the procedures for kicking in. I also think that, again, the market study at that time in 2021 only projected that at least 20, they only projected an additional 25,000 square feet of commercial enterprises could be supported by the market that existed then. So part of this is, there's many pieces to this, but I think one of the themes that I would emphasize is because of we have a small physical area that we're looking at for these purposes, and the customer base and the workforce base is also challenging. We need to be very specific and very intentional if we want to achieve the vision that we're going to talk about. The other constraints that the study mentioned was septic systems, internet connectivity, and again, decreasing workforce population. There's been a substantial decrease in the, didn't go?
Not DCs.
Not deceasing, no, we haven't, no, workforce population. They're not here. That 25 to 45-year-old cohort, that sort of maximum working age, we're losing that population rapidly. It's going to be maintained. I want to talk about the markets. We took a look at, when you talk about the markets, as I said, the Eastham market study really focused on our market. There's two additional markets. One is a market for formula-based businesses. And one of the things we sort of appreciate as a learn is that when you name it, when a Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, or Burger King, or whatever, says, hey, I'd love to have something. They're looking at the market that goes from Provincetown to Orleans, and they're looking at the residents, the tourists, the workforce that's going up and down Route 6. So for a formula business to come in, the economics work because they're not looking at Eastham's economics. They're looking at it, sort of an Outer Cape economics. And, it's important in zoning, you can't regulate ownership. And you can regulate uses. And under the state of Massachusetts, you can regulate uses pretty broadly, but you can't regulate ownership. So knowing that the DCPC really started as an initiative to sort of protect the character of Eastham from a formula-based business, in our recommendations that Paul will go over, we've preserved what is a current prohibition against drive-throughs. And we've also added a great deal of specificity to design elements so that you can, I won't say you complete, there's a disincentive. We have a variety of things that are a disincentive. That's not to say a formula business would not come in. In the process of going through this, we had a lot of discussions with the town planner at in P-Town. And we were out, really kind of querying about formula businesses. They really have a very aggressive stance on this, I will say. But they gave us an example which is amazing. Is Luke Lobsters just shut up at the end of McMillan Pier. Now Luke Lobsters, I didn't know them, but they're a regional chain. They have multiple outlets. I don't know if they franchise or whatever, but they have branding, they have uniforms, they have menus, they have their thing, okay? Provincetown has been able to negotiate, they have none of those. They can be there, they can be Luke Lobsters, but there's no branded uniforms, no branded menus, no branded signage. They are just Luke Lobsters. Now, why would a business do this? Well, we're at the end of McMillan Pier with all those cruise ships coming off. That's like, they're gonna print money in Luke Lobsters. So, but I'm saying, you can get a branded business. Similarly, if you look on Bradford Street, there's a CVS, which is there with minimal branding. So it is possible to have a formula business that doesn't sort of, disrupt the character of the, but there's an intentionality around planning departments and planning boards in terms of exercising that kind of initiative. The second market we looked at was second home buyers. There is, when you look at the housing production report, literally most of the housing development has been for high-end properties, and that's been going on for years. And because of the economics of the value of land, the cash flow that can be generated from part-time rentals, that is a market that without some guardrails will really continue unabated. We're not making broad-based recommendations here for the town as a whole, although inclusionary zoning, which was passed by the town 2 or 3 years ago, would apply to this district. But we are saying that with the second home buyers, we have made some very specific housing proposals. Again, you will see top of the shop, we are suggesting modest, I'm saying modest height bonuses if you were to build year-round rental housing. And that would happen on commercial property. It is one of the things we heard from commercial developers, that small-scale retail is not economically viable because of the cost of construction and the cost of financing and what you need in return to get as a rent. We have rents in our district that run $12, $15, $18 a square foot. Some of the developers we talked to said, you build us another new small retail, we've got to be at $25 to $50 per square foot. So when we think about retail, you know, how can we sort of keep those local businesses or encourage small scale businesses? The answer we got back from developers is housing. Give us cash flow, give us opportunity. And that was from developers. It aligns with some of the needs of, obviously a big need in Eastham, but that I think is really important. I just want to say a couple things about the rental market. We've lost over 300 units of year-round rental housing in this town over the past 10 years. And sometimes I've gone to some of the meetings in town and people sort of say, rental housing, we don't want rental housing, you know, it's sort of like people have a lot of preconceptions. We had a lot of rental housing in this town. It was in the neighborhoods. It was scattered site, it was small scale, and people for generations lived in rental houses, more than 300 of them. We've lost that. And really the notion that the town has many initiatives that it's innovating around rental subsidies, ADUs, nonprofit investment. So there's a lot of activity that's going on to try to capture some of that. How can we establish something? But those are very, but that's going to be, they're not going to replace 300. You know, I think if certain innovative strategies, you know, there's funding constraints, et cetera, you know, if this town can start having 5 to 10 units of housing that come on in the neighborhoods, I would think that would be a home run. But you'd be 30 years before you're going to replace the housing that has been lost, which is another reason why we think that the core business district and transitional business district in particular, because of the infrastructure improvements, because of potentially wastewater, because of a variety of things, there is an opportunity that we could in fact have greater density and rental housing in that corridor. And not do it as 150 units or 200 units, but there's enough opportunities along that corridor that you could develop rental housing along with the town doing housing in the neighborhood, in the general neighborhood, and the combination of that of both of those could make a substantial district difference over time. And we've given you some conceptual ideas of Orleans is doing a lot of this. And so in the back of the report, you'll see a lot of proposals and architectural images of what some of the other towns are doing. Okay. Eastham's housing production plan. Every time I go to this, this was updated just last January to capture the 2020 census. It is, every time I read this, it's just, you know, the price of the rising cost of housing, the median income of the town, which as of the census was 76K a year versus the 191K you need to actually buy a home. Rising poverty rates, aging populations, loss of younger residents. We have the lowest subsidized housing inventory of anyone in the lower or upper Cape. So we're a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of that. And Paul will talk about, we have a missing middle type of housing. We have single family housing, which represents 96% of all of our homes. It's a fairly substantial amount. And there are many kinds of housing that our current zoning does not provide for explicitly. And Paul's going to identify and discuss those. We also have on many fronts. Wastewater is a major project that will impact this district, and is likely to be before town meeting in May. Route 6 roadway improvements, these are improvements that are right at the intersection of Brackett and 6. These have been reviewed and approved by select board. Very positive meeting with DOT last week. There was just a great deal of receptivity to the concepts, so we're hopeful for that. Jackie and Paul have been working with others around a financial analysis that is in its final stages of being completed. The financial analysis is really going to say, if you want to have this mixed income, affordable, attainable types of housing, how can you finance that? Many organizations are trying to figure out how to finance that. The bottom line is, you can't attain that without some sort of public involvement and public subsidy is basically what's happening. So we need to think through that in terms of financing these projects. And then the Northeast Corridor Plan. I'm going to maybe talk about, is that this one here? That's a homework. Okay, let me bring these up. So, out of the charrette that we had in December of 2023, and we had the landscape architect who was there with us, Peter, there was a lot of discussions about roadway connections. Now, some of these, the roadway connections tying Teton and Town Center Plaza together had already been, sort of, the idea had been put on the table. And I guess a long time ago, there were conversations about Holmes Road, but those both got revisited. And so we think that there's a tremendous economic development opportunity and advancement for this entire district with new roadway connections. That is outside of the scope. Again, we're not the planning the roadways. The consultants have sort of confirmed, just from a physical space, that these are possible. Now that there's been no engineering done. And obviously, much of this property, maybe with the exception of Town Plaza, is all privately owned. So we're not proposing taking, we're just saying that there's enormous potential here, and I want to walk through this. Something we think, and we've made a recommendation, we believe the town should pursue. So if I go to the Brackett Road, the orientation is, this is Brackett Road. And these are all in the book. I don't know exactly the page.
15.
15, okay. This is Brackett Road. And the concept that has been running around for a while is, can we get a connector road that would bring us down to Teton, which is down here? The town owns property up until about this point. So we know that there's a good amount of this road that could be built. And Paul and others have been in dialogue with some of the other local businesses, and there seems to be some receptivity. A lot of planning will be done. Again, this is conceptual, but, and I'll talk about this with Holmes Road. You can have a road going through there, as well as there's enough space that there could be a small sort of service road to get people into sort of parking spaces. But you could theoretically have housing along that backside, or it could be other commercial development. The zoning doesn't mandate that, but we are suggesting we could have housing. But one of the big things about these roadways is we're adding, if these go through and this happens, they have multiple positive traffic flow, being able to think about a pedestrian access, the whole concept of walkability. As much as we want to improve, and we have recommendations for improving the frontage on Route 6, it's not ideal that you want to be walking on the side of Route 6 with kids. But there's a lot of opportunity here in terms of thinking through Brackett Road as more of a main street, and that this connector road could really have different opportunity. Where these new roads, and we'll get to the Holmes Road, you're now giving property owners frontage on two sides. There is frontage over to a road here and frontage on a road here. there's an awful lot of, and flexibility to add housing on the site, to add top of the shop housing, et cetera. So there are things in this plan which we think will tremendously benefit the walkability and the access for residents. We also think will add economic value to property owners because they have a lot of options now in terms of thinking through. Even these back lots, some of these properties like Landmark Fence own these back lots here. So, you know, is this something that, however they decide to redevelop their property, workforce housing, or maybe it's something different? Again, this creates more opportunity for them. Similarly, this is Holmes Road. This is the main Holmes Road. I will talk to you about this in a minute, but these side streets don't exist. And this is what do you call this? This is a paper road? This is a paper road? Yeah, this is a panhandle that goes out there. Again, we have provided in this recommendation, we have advocated that the town begin the process of master planning this area, advancing design for roadways, engaging the property owners along this, because we think there's tremendous opportunity for economic development here. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But the roadways, again, give people more frontage, provide much more circulation. There's a lot of opportunity here. And there's even land, undeveloped land at the end of this, which could be an expansion of trade space. And there's even more land adjacent to the campground that could potentially be multifamily housing. And that the proposal that this doesn't show, but does show in your package, is that this road could come down to Route 6. So we would be taking traffic off of Route 6, and you could theoretically have businesses, economic development, and potentially workforce housing all through this area. We have not, again, you know, with all these pretty pictures, it sounds like we've planned everything. You haven't planned everything, but you will see in the zoning proposals that the regulatory relief needed to make this happen, we're recommending we put the zoning in place. Doesn't mean it will happen. We don't know exactly what will happen. There's a lot of master plan that happens, but the notion of having mixed-use development, top of the shop housing, et cetera, are all included in the proposals. Shoot. Yeah, really. Local business feedback. Okay, I'll go quickly. I've mentioned the redevelopment. People are concerned are going to be priced out of the market. We heard insufficient workforce around customer base. Mixed-use development was very strongly supported by people who are running businesses. They all went, I can build housing on the top, I might build housing on the back, I can please. They were like, that was very positive. Developer feedback. We heard a lot about the high cost of capital, the construction costs, the new state zoning code. The feeling is there are a certain amount of environmental related and other kinds of requirements now. The feeling that will add new costs. We heard strongly that from developers that wastewater is really vitally important. It doesn't mean this. If this were not approved, it doesn't mean development could not happen, but it means you're putting onto the cost of that development wastewater treatment plants or very sophisticated alternative systems that will add costs to the project. So again, in commercial projects that have very slim margins, we want a lot of things to happen here. Wastewater becomes really critical infrastructure element for this thing. And we mentioned height restrictions. Again, Paul will go through these details, but again, we've allowed some incentives and we put some examples in the back. Buildings that are fronting the street could go up another 5 feet. Right now, with the 30-foot zone, you could, in sort of an attic space, get in a couple, 3 studio apartments, kind of squishy, but it's difficult. And what we heard from developers, another 5 feet would give us a lot more opportunity to do something on top of the shop. Similarly, we looked at, for example, the project that's going on, this 3-story, 65 units, what's the name of the property? Province Post. Again, talked to the developer of that. The 3rd story made all the difference in terms of them being able to pencil out this project. So again, we've recommended what we call the back of the lot, 3-story, to go 39 feet, which is 9 feet higher than the standard in Eastham. But that 39 would need to be 100 feet back from the front and would have this, we'll talk about it, there's enhanced landscaping as well as frontage buildings that we need to sort of obscure the height. So
That's in just 2 zones?
the
39 feet.
core transition, core transition,
Transition.
transition with core.
39, not in the core.
Oh,
Okay. Okay. Pre-existing non-conforming. This will be the Achilles heel of our vision. Virtually every property on this strip is pre-existing non-conforming, which means they have legacy rights. It will, as I said in the beginning, there are no mandates. Someone who's been on their business for 50 years wants to run their business for another 50 years in the same business with some maintenance and some ancillary improvements can do so. However, we will need to, as new projects come on, we try to put in place some triggers in which these properties need to conform. If a property hasn't been used for 2 years, automatically they lose their legacy rights. So, for example, the project Nixon Garage, the corner of Brackett and Route 6, that would need to comply with new zoning. That has been amended for 2 years. However, this went up to, there was a 78, I actually think that's a typo, it's a 1973 decision made by the state Supreme Court, which looked at a challenge to Barnstable zoning and really set out what they call the powers test for when does a pre-existing non-conforming need to comply. And again, if there's a change in use, if there's a different quality, this gets a little squishy. We have to define what is a different quality, and we've abbreviated this language, and it has a different effect on the neighborhood. Okay, now we're going to get into the sort of squishy stuff, and this is, I think, one of the things that I think is going to be most challenging for the planning board, for something, because you're going to have developments, and I'll just give you a comparison. I just looked at the budget for the Lawrence Ave housing development down in Wellfleet, it's 46 units of housing. That's $27 million, okay? That's just 46 units of housing, no commercial, no a lot of other things. If we start coming in with big commercial developments here, which people are coming in with housing, with commercial developments and all kinds of things, you're going to be in the tens of millions of dollars of proposals. That's all good. Except those tens of millions of dollars are going to come in with architects, they're going to come in with lawyers, they're going to come in with a lot of people. And one of the concerns we have is that when you get into these sort of subjective things, I mean, we've tried to quantify architectural design and height, whatever, and specify wherever we could, so it's not a debate. But we're going to get into a lot of squishy stuff here. And so the problem is, how will we realize, if every, we've been sort of going back and forth saying, okay, how, if someone says, it really is an existing use. I had an ice cream shop. This is my example. I have an ice cream shop, but I'm going to have a restaurant, a big restaurant. I'm going to serve ice cream. Is that a continuation of existing use? I mean, you can see all the craziness. But this is going to be, I think, a really big policy issue in terms of how we achieve this. Because there's one thing. We might get, say, a local family from a lot of our businesses, and they kind of want to do some things that, on the face of it, doesn't really work. But, they get a lawyer who can argue the point, and it gets to be a Ray, and we sort of say, what do we do about this? The problem with not adhering to the zoning bylaw as it's being laid out is that you'll start setting precedent. So if the first person in the gate is someone that you kind of like, well, maybe we're gonna do this. The next entity on the gate might be a formula business you all pay. But if you set the precedent for what's the decision before, you're gonna be living with that. So I think the first few projects that come out of the gate, it's going to be very, very critical that the intent and the scrutiny be made, so we're not, whatever you decide, one thing you're going to be living with. And so my final recommendation on this is that if this proposal or some version of this proposal gets accepted by the town, I would strongly suggest that this would reboot. Because I think one of the things that's going to be imperative about the select board and the two regulatory boards is that everyone has a common understanding of what the intent and what we're all trying to achieve. That doesn't mean that each individual group, they have their own procedures. And I'd also suggest that maybe in the first few projects that come out of the gate, you may want to involve town council a little bit more. Like if you're starting to look at powers tests, so as to not have a group of folks, and I don't know how many lawyers are in the room, but you might want to get the foundation of this. So that's my recommendation. If this passes, I really think there should be some strategic discussions and maybe, without a particular project in front of you, sort of, come up with examples. Well, what if we see this? What if we see this? How do you interpret this? I think it's going to be really imperative for the town to sort of be on the same page in terms of the direction we want. And I think this is going to be the biggest challenge for this plan. So, our recommendation, concentrate mixed uses in the core transitional and safe districts. Incentivize year-round affordable and workforce housing. Support sustainable development and environmental protections. I haven't talked a lot about that. Paul's going to talk about some of the things put in place there. Promote architectural design that reflects traditional New England village, minimize traffic impact and enhance traffic safety, and encourage local commercial and economic development, and disincentivize formula businesses and commercial sprawl. That is sort of the big picture. And we're just about 10 minutes behind. So we want to have a Q&A. There's all the boards up here. Paul's going to go through all the details. And we have coffee. No?
We have hot chocolate.
Oh,
And we may have coffee coming soon if some folks get things ready.
oh, okay. Well, if you'd like a cup of hot chocolate, why don't we just take really, 5 or 7 minutes, just quickly, let's take a break, and then we're going to go through a lot of detail. Okay?
Okay, thank you, everybody, and we'll get right into it. Before I forget, though, I just want to say my deep thanks to the zoning task force, past and present. They have done a tremendous amount of work over the last few years. We would not be here. There's no way I could do this solo, nor would I attempt to do that, so my thanks to the task force for all they've been doing. So I'm going to go into some of the detail. There's a lot of detail, but we'll try to keep it high level. But just to kind of start a summary at the beginning, Mary mentioned when you look through that bylaw, there's still a lot of black ink, so we're not starting from scratch. I would say the majority of the regs we have in place are still in place. The amendments are really trying to augment and clarify the bylaw to give more specificity, to make things less subjective, and to put into place some best practices for form-based code. And I will say that, we did look at a lot of different base documents, but at the end of it, most of these things really came from Cape Cod Commission model bylaws and best practices that the Commission's been supporting for a number of years. So I take some solace in that there are a lot of changes, but it is all locally based, and the majority is locally sourced. And again, we have been on like a 10-year planning mission, and everything in here really derives from things that we've been hearing, best practices, recommendations over the last many years with all of these past planning efforts that have been ongoing. So just really quick overview. What we're trying to introduce into the existing bylaw is form-based code requirements. Form-based code is a little bit different than our standard zoning. Standard zoning really is just involved with regulating uses, segregating land uses. Here's your residential over here, commercial over here, maybe mixed use over here. Not a lot of detail on how it should look and feel. A form-based code is centered on how it should look and feel, the design of the exterior of the building and the site and how it relates to the neighborhood and the town in general. And really, it's a way to tailor the zoning more closely to what the desire of the community is and what our needs are. So again, it's really reliant on what is it going to look like. We're not so much interested in what's going on behind the doors, although we still want to segregate some uses. Obviously, industrial uses need to go there and so forth, but it's really what is the look and feel, how is it going to relate to the neighborhood and the community as a whole. And that's really, and getting predictable development patterns, reinforcing that New England village center that we're trying to get to. And also a big part of this, hopefully, is to get clear expectations on what the regulations want. And, sorry, did you do?
Yeah, so Dave Purnell, Planning Commission. I'm just curious if these proposed amendments to the zoning bylaws apply to the town as a whole or
No.
just to the Eastham?
No, good question, thank you. These are limited to the Eastham corridor special district, the ECSD, which is the 6 sub-districts in North Eastham. Good, thank you. Good, I wanted to clarify that. And again, so setting clear expectations for the boards that have to utilize these, but also the applicants, the property owners, the business owners, so that when they come in with their project, they look through the zoning code, they know what the expectation is, they know what the specifications are for how big a building should be, how it should be designed, what the parking should be. So hopefully that streamlines the regulatory process and leaves less subjectivity. So that's really an important part, what we hope to achieve with the form-based code. So there's a lot of diagrams in there, there's a lot of charts, there's a lot of numbers, and as Mary said, we actually decided to pull back from the amount of data that we were putting in there because we thought it's maybe a little bit too much for Little Eastham, but what we left in we feel is important to really set the expectations for what we want to see with future redevelopment. So I'll go through some of the subject matter for the amendments. First, we are proposing some changes to specific properties to the zoning map. Mary mentioned this, the Tea Time property, key property, a lot of expectations for this. The current zoning district that it's in actually would not allow us to do what a lot of the recommendations have called for that. So we want to move that into the transition commercial. It'll give us more flexibility. And again, when we start to talk about building heights and so forth, transition commercial is where we think that will be most beneficial, again, to achieve what has been talked about broadly for the vision for that property. The Shell station and the old Nickerson garage building, those properties are actually office residential, but they're right on Route 6. And office residential is the least intense of the districts. It's the most residential oriented. And we felt that didn't quite line up with you have frontage on Route 6, you're adjacent to transition commercial to the north. And so really to get a better balance, again, long-term future, you're driving down Route 6 to have one side be completely, transition commercial and core commercial, and the other side directly across the street to have, it was really an imbalance. So we're recommending that we change these 2 specific properties to better align with the corridor. And finally, the 2 properties on Brackett Road, right now they are limited commercial. We want to move those into core commercial, again, to balance out the remaining commercial properties on Brackett Road, because again, the long-term vision is really for Brackett Road, we believe could really be the more traditional Main Street. Route 6 is always going to be a hybrid situation. It's going to be multi-lane highway, even if we achieve all of the improvements. Brackett Road has the opportunity to be our kind of quintessential Main Street, and we want to make sure that we have some flexibility for the properties there to expand the commercial corridor. So those are the three specific changes to the zoning, and that's it. The rest of this sub-district would remain as is. We're also recommending some adjustments to the land use table. One of the best practices for form-based code, again, is it's not reliant so much on the uses. We're interested in the site development, the buildings, what's it going to look like. So a lot of times with form-based code, you'll strip down the land use table significantly so that it's really just a short and concise listing of general uses. We didn't go quite that far, but we did take, and the use table that we have has a lot of very specific uses. And so we looked at it and said we can actually consolidate a lot of that stuff. So for example, there's lines to say convenience store, gift shop, barber shop, all these things, pet shop. Those all really fall under retail sales and services. And so we're trying to simplify the use table by consolidating some of the use categories. But what is very important is we do want to maintain the control over the things that we specifically want to prohibit. And so those, there is specificity remaining in the use table for those things. And for instance, so gas stations, fuel stations, drive-throughs, things like that. We do have a provision in the bylaw that allows the opportunity for a business or a property owner to apply for a special permit for things that are not specifically prohibited. So there is flexibility, and obviously not everything's going to, we can't list everything under the sun in a use table. And so there's going to be situations where, it's a little gray and some decisions have to be made. But we want to be specific on the things we absolutely don't want to happen that we think are not compatible with the district. So, and I think the last thing I'll say on the use table consolidation is we did consolidate, but again, we actually added some things in for housing because we want to make sure that diversification of housing uses are explicitly allowed. So it's a mix. So I think we did shorten it up, but there is some things that we felt was important to specify.
Oh, can I ask a little
Yes.
question? Does the prohibition of the drive-through and gas station mean a gas station and a drive-through that are together, or both of them? And it's either or, and certainly not a combo?
This would prohibit basically all new drive-throughs. So
Okay.
whether they're attached. Yeah, it was just a question about drive-throughs, whether they would be prohibited as a standalone or if they're combined with a convenience store or a gas station, right? And the answer to that, the proposal would be yes, that you wouldn't have any new drive-throughs. And we've actually specified that
Gas stations.
a gas station would not, well, you wouldn't, in theory, you wouldn't have a new gas station. So an existing gas station that was remodeling to add a drive-through would not be allowed to do so.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do we do about the existing gas station?
So as Mary said, and we'll get to that in a little later, those are pre-existing non-conforming, and
We have to deal with.
they're
that.
allowed to maintain, although if and when they redevelop, there's some things that get triggered, which they may be able to retain that, but would have to redesign architecturally and make it, fit better with the design. But again, those are things that it's really case by case, so you gotta look at what specifically they're proposing to do. But that's going to be a big challenge, and I have a whole slide on that. Don't worry. And again, just I mentioned the adding specific uses, so we're really trying to promote diversifying the housing stock, multifamily and mixed use, for all the reasons that supporting information Mary went into earlier. So that's the land use table. So still related to the land use table, as I mentioned, housing stock. When we talk about missing middle, that's a term that is really caught on with housing, especially here in the Cape. A lot of towns, they just talk about this term missing middle. So we're talking about non-single family homes, which as Mary said, is 96% of the town is single-family homes. We don't need more single-family homes. We need duplexes, cottage courts, townhouses, multifamily, in order to meet the needs for now and into the future. So we're trying to make sure those are allowed by right wherever possible, again, to streamline the regulatory process, make it easier for developers to do these projects, which we need, and create mixed use and multifamily housing. And I'll just reiterate, Mary kind of touched on this, but we cannot get all the housing we need just on tea time in Town Center Plaza and the few other scattered sites that the town owns. We can't do it. So it really comes down to what our private property is going to be able to do. The way that they redevelop is going to really dictate whether we get the housing we need into the future. So we can't do it just on our town-owned. Even if we maxed it out 100% housing, it still won't get us to where we need to be. So this is really a key point of what we're trying to build into the zoning and incentivizing these uses. Yep.
I was just going to ask whether you could incentivize the private sector in order to build more apartments, above shop housing, so forth.
Yep, so we have a few things, and I'll go into, I think it's coming up the next slide, to talk about that, yep. Okay. So we need more housing, but we don't necessarily need more market rate, kind of luxury, higher-end housing. And that's a strong market that we know isn't really going to go away for the Cape. We're a desirable location, and there's a really good business formula for that. So we want to try to foster and incentivize more modest housing. And we talked with the developers about this point, and what we came up with was we're proposing to put limits on individual unit sizes. So we're talking about multifamily, townhouses, apartments, multifamily buildings. We're proposing to put limits on the individual unit sizes so that you don't get large kind of luxury, higher-end units. But the reality check is obviously, everything comes with a cost. The developers who are going to do this have to make this all pencil out. So we came up with the idea that we would allow for an average unit size so that it gives some flexibility to developers. So you can't do all, large-scale palatial condo units, upscale, but you can still have a mix and match range so that hopefully this will pencil out for the developer, and we had feedback that it would and that these numbers make sense so that you can have different unit sizes, large to small, but overall, you got to balance that the majority of the units are going to be in that the smaller, more modest size range, which we hopefully will yield more modest affordability. So this is, I think kind of an innovative approach. The folks that we've talked to really, were surprised by this, but thought, it's an interesting way to do it, and we've gotten feedback, and we feel like the numbers that we've listed here are based in reality, and so this is kind of an important piece for the dimensional tables that we're proposing to put into the zoning. Yeah.
Just mention, when we looked at top-of-the-shop housing and looked at other models, we saw some in Howard and in Hyannis. They weren't really prescribing the type of housing, so they didn't deal with size, inclusionary zoning, whatever. And in all instances, they got luxury condos. So, 1,200 square foot luxury condos. So again, when we looked at the examples of what happens without any sort of specificity, the market is going to drive to more profit. So again, this was sort of, trying to thread the needle between can you build this, can you make money, does it work, and is it going to meet our needs? And that's the sort of tensions we were trying to straddle all along with this. I'm sorry.
No, that's good, thank you. And what you're seeing in this clip from the chart that's in the bylaw, we're trying to calibrate this by the building type, but also the zoning sub-district, because that's going to be tied to the size of the building that you could do and the density are also calibrated to this district. So we're trying to link these things together. So what's good, what's reasonable for core commercial isn't necessarily the same for what's in the limited commercial away from, onto the north and south, away from that critical Brackett Road, Route 6 intersection. So that's why you see the different numbers. It's not a blanket, approach. The other piece, when we're talking about building design, and Mary mentioned this, is the idea of incentivizing these housing types by providing height bonuses. So this is just trying to illustrate that for your single-use, typical commercial building, which you can still do in this district, you don't have to do, we're not mandating everyone has to do a mixed use or anything, you can still do your commercial building if that's what you need to do, but you're not going to get any height bonus. So you'd be maxed out at your 30-foot limit, and if that's your plan for the property, that's fine. But if you're going to do a mixed use or multifamily, you're going to get some bonuses. These bonuses are tied specifically to the types of housing we're trying to incentivize. So if you were going to do a mixed-use building, so commercial on the bottom, housing on the upper floors, you can go to 35 feet. And as Mary said, that makes a big difference with the flexibility of how you can design and maybe get some squeeze an additional unit here and there into your building. If you're going to do that, that's great, but we want year-round rental. That's the number one need, and we need seasonal workforce rental. So these bonuses are tied to the types of housing that we need. So if you're going to do, as Mary said, we looked at other towns, market, high-end apartments on top of a new commercial building, you're not going to get the height bonus. And same for multifamily and townhouse buildings. You can go to 39 feet, and this gets into a third floor. But our conversations with developers, and we're talking about multifamily housing, larger densities, which, as I said, we need them. We can't do everything on tea time alone. We would let you go to 39 feet, but that's a specific area. And we're calibrating this to the sub-district. So it comes with some caveats. Again, you need to have year-round or seasonal workforce or a deed-restricted affordable development has to be part of that. But we also want to make sure that these larger, taller buildings are set back, so they're not right on Route 6, right on the main drag, where, it might not be compatible. The task force, feels 39 feet is not an insane height, but we have a strong tradition of two-story, 30-foot, and so we want to make sure that we calibrate that to say it's not going to be right in everyone's face, right on Route 6. It's got to be set back. It's going to have the landscaping, and if you're going to do multiple buildings, have a smaller frontage building. And these are techniques to dissipate the size and the scale and the massing. Yeah, Jamie.
Well, this is,
Oh, sorry, I saw Jamie.
sorry, I thought you said Jamie. Sorry, Jamie.
That's all right, close.
Starts with a J.
I just kind of want to reiterate again, so the 35-foot bonus and the 39-foot, those are only available in what were the two zones again? Transitional commercial and
Limited.
limited
Yep.
commercial. Thank
And-
you.
And the reason for that is really when you look at the land that's there,
Yeah,
those are where the larger tracks. And again,
that's where you're going to
It's-
be building these.
yeah,
So they'll be set
that's where tea time is. That's where large properties at the end of Holmes Road is. That's where Atlantico. Again, not saying we don't know what folks are going to do, but
Right.
there's large tracts of property that go a long way back from Route 6 where we feel a larger, more dense development with some height could live very nicely back there and have a whole little neighborhood. And again, this bakes into form-based code, the formula. They're not going to be big box buildings. It's going to have all of the design elements that really result in village style. So we think those are the areas, and that's why.
That's the targeted
Those properties are in those districts where we think that could handle that. We don't want to jam a 39-foot story building on core commercial,
Right, it's too
right where
small.
Brackett Road, because it wouldn't be appropriate.
That makes sense.
Sorry, Jerry.
Yeah, these, in the mixed use and multifamily, they are, for the residential part, required to be only rentals?
That's the,
In the proposal.
yeah.
In the,
that's the
yeah, I
proposal.
mean, that's in the proposal. They must be rentals, either year-round or seasonal work.
Again, it was looking at the enormous deficit we have in that category of housing, and knowing that the town is pursuing other things, but it'll never give us the volume of rental in the surrounding neighborhood.
It's only a curiosity question, Mary, not against it. Yeah, we do need rentals badly, so I agree. I just was, thanks.
Well, just for reference, the complex in behind Sam's Deli that's new, multifamily, I think we gave a 3-foot or 4-foot height variance on that. What are the square footages of the units within those buildings?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but they are, I mean, certainly, I mean, that was an affordable housing
Yeah, I mean-
development that,
I'm just curious as how big, back to your average versus maximum in these units, I mean, what did we already permit? I mean, are they 600 square feet? Are they?
there's a range. I mean,
Of
because there's 1, 2, 3 bedrooms in there. I don't know, Rachel,
I don't
do you
recall what the
have a
range
percent? Yeah.
is.
We could certainly get that info, but,
We'll be able to get the range, but I think that, I mean, one of the things is we bounce this off the state, what do they call it, the, line up with state subsidy plans.
Okay.
If we were going to seek public subsidy, these are in line with that.
Okay.
Suzanne?
Is there a minimum square foot for the units, and then how that balances with like tiny home idea? I am not super into seeing units that are much smaller than 600 square feet, and I'm wondering how the state being like, you can do tiny homes, and how that intersects with this.
Well, these numbers would be geared towards multifamily buildings. A tiny home, we're really talking about a single-family.
Right, so
Standalone,
no
and-
one's gonna try and be like, well, you allow it as a standalone unit, why don't you allow the same square footage in
The-
an apartment building?
These are maximums, we don't have minimums. We took minimums out. So theoretically, someone could propose, I mean, there's micro units in Boston that are 250 square feet.
But that,
I'm not saying, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we don't have it, but that actually was a big initiative to have that. And it hasn't taken off, but it exists.
also plays into building code and health code minimum requirements also, so.
So there's no bottom at this point for that number.
Okay, yeah, I would maybe be
And
interested in
again,
the
I'm gonna say
bottom.
that the reason we're doing this is to get the feedback
Yeah.
and get ideas so that, so this is not set in stone yet, and so we want these ideas, and if we uncover something, we still have time to adjust. Yeah, Jackie?
But the state sanitary code and the housing code have minimums.
That's true, yes. Yeah.
We don't have to put minimums.
Is that 250?
It must be 250.
It must be 250.
Must be.
It's 150 for one person, and then you add 100 square feet for every next person. And that's 105 CMR.
So maybe we do want to consider a minimum.
I-
No, you don't. You don't need to.
Okay,
Okay, anyway,
Sorry,
we keep going.
just, did I miss something, Jackie?
I just want to call attention to that in this chart, you also have an average unit size per building.
Oh, that's good.
So there's some math that balances
Okay.
out, if you drop to a 300 square foot size unit here
It's
in
going
the
to
building.
be compensated for.
Right, it's gonna shift the whole average,
Yeah.
so the average is a controlling
So
factor.
that,
and they still have to meet the average.
And some of the seasonal workforce housing, that if someone who's here for 12 weeks,
Okay,
250 might not be a bad thing.
okay,
So,
all right, all
anyways.
right.
So, recommendations for exterior of the building, again, form-based code, we're interested in what it's going to look like. So we have, and what we have now in the bylaw, Mary mentioned this, is really just a general reference to the Cape Cod Commission's design guidelines. There's not a lot of teeth in it. So, like I said, most of the stuff that we're adding, the specificity comes from the Cape Cod Commission guidelines. We're just putting that directly into the bylaw, so it's really clear in black and white. And so there will be language about roof forms, building articulation, really to make sure that we don't end up with big boxy buildings. We want things that are traditionally styled as traditional New England with the traditional roof lines and have building offsets. And so these are examples of charts that are in the bylaw are really trying to illustrate how you achieve different design, how you can meet the architectural guidelines with different variations of how you would design and orient a building. And again, things like dormers, these are all important pieces that control the look and feel and the size and the scale of the building. So we want to make sure that they're proportional and appropriate to Eastham. There is language about exterior facade materials. This is one area where I think we did pull back a little bit because we don't want to micromanage everybody's materials, but it is important when you're building a cohesive village center. And we want something that we can all be proud of, and so that gets into building materials. So traditional materials and appropriate composite materials, which again, based on the feedback we felt from the developers and then the builders, wasn't a huge issue. Those are allowed by right. We do place limits on vinyl siding and vinyl fencing. Again, it's not completely prohibited, but they would be on certain areas where, the back side of a building or things where, if it makes a difference with how a project's going to pencil out and, they make the case, we have some flexibility. But we really want a cohesive, well-designed district. Landscape standards is huge. A lot of redevelopment potential. There are some critical areas that are going to abut residential, so Brackett Landing, for example, and Brackett and Village at Nauset Green. As the commercial redevelops and you're going to have mixes of uses and more activity, and hopefully we have a vibrant village center, we want to make sure that it's balanced. So there's language in the bylaw that requires, substantial landscape buffers that have, evergreen, year-round coverage, requirements that buildings be stepped back. So one of the things we've done, this isn't changing, this is current, but the original zoning shortened up the setback. So you can have buildings that are really close to the lot line, but we don't necessarily want a 39-foot tall building 10 feet off the lot line that abuts a single-family home or a residential neighborhood. So there's items built into the zoning that requires setbacks or step backs to take the visual impact of that off. And that, again, dealing with the periphery of the lots and obviously parking lots and interior islands, we have specific language about minimum landscaping. Environmental standards. This whole area is really is important to remember that it's in our water resource protection district. So there's an overlapping jurisdiction and presents some challenges. So our only major commercial area is overlapping with our most sensitive water resource area. So we want to make sure that we have protections in place, which already exists. So there is a limit to what you could do with impervious surfaces. It requires that you have water recharge and so forth. And so some of these tactics that you would use are, some just vegetated buffers, bioswales, grasscrete, things like that. So these are just illustrating some of the things that are built into the bylaw. And most of this already exists. We're not really changing it, but we want to make sure that, to reinforce that we're not losing it. And we are putting some specific items, specifically the native plant species, which is something we've done with our residential district. We are taking that as a best practice to put it in, so at least we have a minimum that you should be planting native species that are appropriate to the site. So not a whole lot of change in this section, but we just want to emphasize it is an important piece, especially because of our water resource overlapping jurisdiction. Lighting and signs. So we have a sign code that is in a separate section of the bylaw, and to really overhaul that is really a separate exercise. But again, we wanted to take advantage of the time we're kind of opening up this ECSD, and we don't want to do that multiple times. So we're proposing that we put some specific sign code language into the ECSD really as a way to kind of expedite this without tearing apart the whole sign code for the whole rest of the town. So this is really just for the ECSD only. And again, this is based on trying to make sure that we emphasize, traditional New England character, that the signage, again, form-based code, what does it look like? We want harmony in the site design. Signage is a huge piece. It's very important. We want the signs to be in harmony with the way the site is, with what the building architecture is, what the style of the building is. So some specific things prohibiting specific types of signage, and that's built into the language we're proposing. And the site lighting too. Again, we want dark sky where we can get it. Obviously, things like parking lots, they need the safety lighting, but we want to make sure external lights are down-shielded for light pollution, and again, that are aesthetically appropriate to the style of building we're trying to promote. So that was an overview of kind of the technical components that we pulled out that we wanted you to be aware of. So this pre-existing non-conforming, there's a section of this bylaw that really has language that deal with pre-existing non-conforming. And as Mary said, pretty much every single property in this district doesn't conform in some way, shape, or form. The landscaping's not where it needs to be, the setbacks, the building itself, so on. The parking is in the front where we don't want it. The language that deals with this in the current bylaw, in my opinion, it's been difficult to engage with property owners and really get significant changes to the site. And I think myself and the planning board, it's just part of being in a small town, and you're working with small businesses and they don't have huge budgets. And so we have certain parameters that you're supposed to meet to qualify, and it really goes to what level of review. So we have a minor site plan, which is not that onerous. You can do it administrative approval. Then you have a major site plan, which means basically more time, money, and effort, and then a special permit. So we've built in certain parameters that say if you have minimum landscaping, if you have minimum requirements, and you have a small project, you could get away with just doing a minor site plan review and save some time, money, and effort. But it gets difficult, and to be honest, it gets into making some judgment calls, which I don't think is appropriate for staff on the staff level, and it puts the boards, when it gets to the board, in awkward positions. The proposal is really not to change the language we have in the bylaw that explains what the different levels of threshold are for compliance. The recommendation is to make those minimums mandatory, so that if you're going to do, depending on the scale and the scope of the project, you have to meet certain minimum requirements. And a lot of times that's going to mean, to kind of cut to the chase of all this, it's going to mean that some small to mid-sized projects that someone might want to put a modest addition on or do some out the door seating or something like that, if this goes through, it will mean they'll have to expand the scope maybe from what they originally thought they were going to do, meaning they might have to add some additional landscaping that they weren't planning to do. They might have to move all, or not all, but some parking, if they have it in the front, to the side or the rear of the building, which means they might have to reorganize the site a little bit more. So again, and I want to emphasize this point because I want feedback, because this is going to be an important piece. Because again, every single property, unless they're starting from scratch and say we're going to redevelop the whole thing, that's easy. Follow the recipe in the form-based code and we're on our way. But most of the projects are going to be, I want to add this, I want to expand that, I want to do these little projects. At least I can foresee that for a while. And so, again, this is going to mean that you thought you were just putting a patio or covered some outdoor seating. In order to get that approval, if you got parking in the front, and again, this is probably the biggest things, are adding landscape and moving some piece of the parking, so you're reducing the amount of parking, reducing the hardscape in the front of the lot, so that you get some aesthetic improvements and bring it more in line with the goal of the district. Routine property maintenance, Mary mentioned this, that kind of stuff would be exempt. You can, you want to repaint, you want to re-side, you want to, all that doesn't trigger any site plan review, that doesn't trigger, you do whatever you want with that. But as I said, I'm specifically emphasizing this because it's a change. It's going to be a stricter, a more stricter approach. And so I still have some more slides, so obviously we can come back to that, but it's an important point. And I want to bring this up because, frankly, I'm going to be the one having these discussions, and Jackie in the office to say, you're going to have to rethink this project, and it can be difficult. So I'll leave it at that. We can come back to that. Formula business, again, key piece, this whole DCPC started with a formula business. So we're maintaining the existing regulations, and really any formula business automatically requires a special permit. The key piece to know about that is special permit is a discretionary approval. The board can say no. They can't say no just because, we don't like you, or we don't like your, garish color scheme, or whatever it might be. It has to be based in the language that's in the bylaw, the review criteria. And again, so we're talking about compliance with all of the form-based code elements, the architectural design, the building, the placement, the landscaping. But when it comes to special permit, there's some additional things that the board can consider. The overall impact on the character of the community, impact on town services, on the local tax base, on employment. The board can say, a formula business is going to come in, they're going to maybe severely undercut local businesses. The board can look at that and request data and information and take that into an account. So it's not just signage and materials and things like that. And that's an important piece, and it's an important tool that the town has to work with. So we can't prohibit outright. And the Luke's Lobster was a great example of how, Provincetown was able to work with them and proactively get something that everyone could live with. So we have that built into our proposal, or I should say we're maintaining what we have. I touched on this, but again, the regulatory process, so there's 3 levels of review, the minor, major, and special permit. Each one kind of comes with more overhead to deal with, so minor site plans, and we're keeping this, we're not proposing to change this. But what we are proposing is that we institute mandatory peer review, so for these projects listed here, so because these get complicated. And so what that means is that you come in, a developer or property owner comes in with one of these types of projects listed here. The board, staff's going to automatically recommend that we get a third party to look at it to help with the analysis. Sometimes that might be assistance from the Cape Cod Commission, and they always do a great job with their bandwidth and their staff. But sometimes that is hiring an outside consultant. So if it's a traffic study or looking at the overall site design, or maybe some technical components of the stormwater management, it could be any one thing or a combination of things. So these projects are going to get complicated, and we could be facing multiple projects simultaneously depending on how things go. So this is really trying to be realistic about staff capacity and expertise, because I'm not an expert in all these items. And so, again, trying to set out clear expectations. If you come in with one of these things, the applicant, they know that we're going to send it for peer review. And that gets built into being upfront and clear about it. And hopefully the applicant takes that in consideration with their project scope, their timeline, their costs. Yes?
Who pays for the peer review?
The planning board is authorized to have, the applicant, and the planning board is authorized in their rules and regs. The zoning board is also, for that matter, to request that at their cost.
And this happens frequently in a lot of towns. That in some towns, I went through a project in Dedham where almost any project, you have to mandatorily have a peer review, which was their consultant. So my traffic study, my engineering study, whatever environmental impact, got a second opinion. So, you weren't, the board could be presented with all of these, studies and whatever. And again, not having the expertise or the staff capacity, it sort of gives you the opportunity to have your own, your second opinion, so to speak. So someone can punch holes in whatever's being put in front of you, so you have enough information to make that decision.
Thank you. So I just want to jump to, everything I've been talking about is in the proposed zoning bylaw, the actual bylaw. We're proposing a companion document, which is the Planning Board Design and Performance Standards. The Planning Board already has rules and regulations, and the rules and regulations allow them to adopt and add on to that document. And so this is really where a lot of important items we think we didn't want to lose, but we thought it might be overwhelming to put everything into the bylaw. It can basically live in this document, and to me, the big advantage is, and Mary mentioned this before, it can be updated a lot more easily through a simpler public hearing process through the planning board. It doesn't have to go to town meeting. And I think this is important because we can't predict all the eventualities that might come, different takes on what a developer might want to do. And part of what this document is best practices, guidance, but it has teeth in it. You have to do these things, not just like nice suggestions. It's like you have to go into this document and show compliance. But it also has performance standards, so minimum requirements that are going to help. And again, setting clear expectations. The developer looks through this stuff and say, I know I'm doing this type of project. I know I got to come in and address these issues up front. But again, this document can be edited a little more easily. And again, things are going to come up that we can't anticipate, or that we might, a new best practice, or something that's in here that doesn't need to be in here anymore. It's making things cumbersome. That's why we went this route with having these complementary documents. So that's the other document they have in your binders is this design standard, which would be adopted by the planning board separately. I don't want to go over it too long, but so parking and access, again, everything that we're trying to do is to foster that traditional village center. We want a walkable, safe streets, pedestrian, bike friendly. This plays into what we're trying to do with the state on Route 6, but again, we have this vision for these other connector roadways, which I'll get into in a minute, but a lot of stuff just existing that we're going to retain, but parking in the rear of the building or to the side, landscape screening. Again, a lot easier when you're starting from scratch, clean site. You can lay out this site a lot more easily, but this is going to get into pre-existing non-conforming issues, which I mentioned. So allowing some flexibility with requiring, I should say, shared curb cuts to improve traffic. So again, depending on if you're coming in with a review, the board's going to be able to say, you got 3 curb cuts on Route 6 already. We want you to combine those 2. Opportunities to work with the adjacent property owner possibly to share curb cuts. All these things are baked into the bylaw, allowing some flexibility to say you can have stacked or tandem parking. So not because again, we don't want everyone to build a 50-lot parking space just because that's what it's required. So and this is really phase 2 of the planning work that we're going to do. If this gets approved or some version of this, the work from there is really facilitating this. Have you talked to the next door property? Do they have anything coming up on the horizon? How can we kind of broker some partnership, get some reduction, get some better use of resources and infrastructure? So this is reflecting that. Yes?
Before you change that, can I just mention a couple of things? You see a square next to the number 3. Mm-hmm. That is, so if, for example, 10 years from now, Cumberland Farms realizes they got to redo their building, and the world's moved to EV, gases, whatever, gas stations would need to put their pumps in the rear of the buildings. So that's one of the things. And parking being behind the main building is sort of also a consistent planning principle that's through here. And the final thing I would say is you see a lot of properties that are sort of right up on Brackett Road or Route 6. The setback, we're trying to, again, the sort of 50s sort of strip mall kind of big parking spaces, small buildings. We're moving buildings to the front. The setback that has been required, the minimum setback, I believe, is 30 feet, correct? Or 30 to 50 feet?
It's depending on the district, so, but for
Depending-
Brackett Road,
Oh,
you
the
could
back.
have a 10-foot
10-foot.
setback, because we want the
But
buildings.
most
on the
of
street.
Route 6. So what I wanted to give you an example of, if you look at Arnold's Restaurant, the building itself is pretty close to the road, and they do lovely landscaping. That's 30 feet. So buildings along Route 6 would sort of have just to give you a feel of where would they come out to. Now, the one difference is Arnold's does beautiful flowers. With our landscaping requirements, 75% of that foliage would need to be available 3 seasons of the year. So it's going to change up the landscaping, but you're going to have more, you're going to have more green, but you will have, so that's the feel. If you think about Route 6, think about, as you're driving by, think about Arnold's, and, if Arnold's was being developed today, we would be encouraging the parking all to be in the rear and that building to be in the front. So that's sort of visual.
So another piece of the form-based code is creating a roadway network plan. And this is in the zoning, and really this is just trying to lay out and communicate to anyone who's going to develop that this is where we want the commercial activity to take place. This is the level of roadway service that we anticipate. So outlining, obviously Route 6 is what it is, but outlining where potential new secondary roads could be. And this gets into the idea of connecting tea time to Route 6. So again, I just want to point out this is a component, pretty common thing with form-based code is to do all of the architectural standards, the design standards, but also lay out a roadway plan, how this all connects, so that you have appropriate buildings that can handle the traffic located on corresponding roadways. And again, a key piece of the DCPC was to address, when it initially got approved, was to improve traffic safety and congestion on Route 6. So I just want to go through a few slides, and here's where the pretty pictures come into play. And this is not, these are pictures to demonstrate what the zoning would allow, not at all what could get developed. These are all, for the most part, private properties, and everyone's going to come in with a vision, but this is what the zoning would tend to gear things towards. So Route 6, and this is where it comes into, like, where these projects happen is really important on what road are you fronting on. So Route 6, it's always going to be this highway, this hybrid. It's not going to be a traditional main street, we know that. But it's also the gateway to North Eastham, and so we're working with the state, as we talked about. So sidewalks, bike path, protected turning lanes, all those things are going to serve this village center plan really well to get traffic to slow down, be more safe, be more aesthetically pleasing. And that's accounted for in the building setback, everything Mary just said about using the Arnold's example. But when we talk about Brackett Road, I mentioned this earlier, this is where we think really the traditional Main Street can take shape over a course of, this is a 20-year horizon. This is not going to happen overnight, but we lay the groundwork now. Brackett Road, so what the architectural design standards call for, what the building setbacks call for, what the sidewalk requirements, bike paths, so forth, they all call for traditional Main Street, buildings up close, street trees. We want a nice pedestrian-oriented traditional Main Street, and Brackett Road is where we think can most readily achieve that. Now, the naming rights to be determined, but a new Main Street, how can we connect Brackett to tea time? This has been talked about for decades, and we've never been closer to achieving that than now, because town controls tea time and Town Center Plaza, the two bookends, and we really, there's 4 properties in between, and we've been having a lot of discussion with those property owners and sharing this information and giving them the vision, and trying to get them to understand some of the huge assets that this could be for the village and also for their individual properties and businesses. So again, this is just showing an illustration of what the zoning, what could happen under the proposed zoning. So again, another Main Street, traditional, small setbacks, mix of uses. These could be townhouses, these could be mixed-use buildings, but this would be a view of, you get from Brackett up to tea time, and these things become cohesive. And whatever we do with tea time and housing, you link these neighborhoods, and it's reinforcing workforce for the property, for the businesses, and also a client base that's right outside your door. And so again, the roadway connections are really vital to achieving the overall vision. And Holmes Road is not an afterthought. So, you know, we talk a lot about Route 6 and connecting the Brackett Road. Holmes Road is going to be very important in the future. Again, for the connectivity, taking traffic off Route 6, but there's a lot of, it's underdeveloped. There's a lot of potential on Holmes Road, and especially there's a huge piece of property undeveloped. And again, we've been talking a lot with the owners about what their plans are, what visions, but this is where we feel trade space can be expanded, which is a vital need. I've heard that a lot from the folks in town, the trades people. But this is also an area where we feel like we can accommodate expanded trade space with mixed use, top of the shop, apartments on the top. Even in an industrial area, we think with the design standards and the way that this can be laid out, these things they can coexist together. And you kind of have to use your imagination. Holmes Road has its limitations now, you drive down there, but this is a 20-year horizon. You got to rethink Holmes Road. Over time, things get redeveloped. We require infrastructure upgrades, sidewalks. Holmes Road becomes something different. And again, it's that critical piece of connecting on the end, connecting back out to Route 6. And those are the properties we talked about earlier, from the McGregor property to the back side of Atlantic Oaks to the rear portion of the motels. There's development potential back there, and those are the areas where we feel like you could have higher densities, some of those higher 39-foot buildings nestled back there with all of the appropriate design aspects. And so again, the roadway network is key. And also, this abuts the rail trail. There's some potential to connect with maybe walking trails where you cut through to Main Street Mercantile, that development. So it doesn't, so this is, yes, roadways, but walking trails, bike, pedestrian connectivity. So, what I said before at the beginning, these recommendations are rooted in all of the planning we've been doing for the past 10 years. All of the studies, all of the meetings we've gone to, the workshops, the consultants. This is the next logical step to amend the zoning for best practices and also to achieve what we're trying to get to with our housing and our economic development goals. And so I'll leave it at that. Again, I thank you all. This has been a lot of information, a lot to download and digest, but thank you all for coming, and I'll leave it at that, and we got time for questions. And
I overlooked a slide, but it'll just, we have, you'll see in this report, a recommendation that, two recommendations. One, we're saying we think the town should begin to master plan Holmes Road from an economic development perspective, really get in there and think about roadways, think about business opportunities, et cetera. I had a conversation with Jackie a few weeks ago, and I had just gotten an email from the Barnstable County, and it just hit me that they wrote this whole newsletter about the fact that we talk about septic systems and environmental impact, and they were talking about, do we have the infrastructure, do we have the businesses to upgrade, like what is virtually every septic system, you know, maybe in the county. And so thinking through, like a Holmes Road, like there's an enormous business that's going to have a 20 or 30-year payout, and that, you know, those could be good jobs. And are we thinking about the economic development sort of, you know, are those jobs for kids that don't go off to college and, you know, graduate our high schools, and they might be there, and they might be top of the shop housing. And there's just a lot. And while we've highlighted the proposal, we think there needs to be a master plan. And we think the time may be really appropriate because the state has just has passed both a housing bill and an economic development bill. And there's a lot of, and I think the town, between all of the planning that it's doing, and if we can go to the state with zoning in place, infrastructure plans underway, I think that there's an opportunity to really, get some support for implementing some of this. So again, Holmes Road is a bigger planning initiative, but we're recommending the underlying zoning that could achieve that but not negating that there needs to be much more planning for that.
And an important piece to Holmes Road is a private road. And so again, we have to work with the property owners, and that's kind of like the next phase of planning, if the zoning gets put in place, is how do we engage with those property owners, start to make things happen, and get that balance, so. Yes.
I had a question about the EV charging station requirement, and if that is meant for presumably the people top of shop, or if that is meant for people visiting. And I guess my concern is we are trying to reduce parking places, and my understanding loosely is that people who live locally usually just modify their homes, and so the EV charging seems to be more for people who are out of town. And so I would like to know more about where the EV charging requirement kind of like fits in to that.
Well, there's a minimum requirement in the parking regulations that require a minimum percentage or amount, depending on how many overall, that you'd have to provide a minimum, I forget, what is it, 15% of the spaces would be for EV
This
chargers.
is coming out of the state, out of model bylaws. The concept of including EV is dominating most of the planning process. And so the regulations and who uses it and what purposes, we didn't go that deep. We just looked at where this is going.
So there's a lot of residential apartments. Those would be the primary uses of EV spots.
Yeah, and I guess that would be my hope, and I guess we can talk more later about, if there will be designated parking for people who live above the shop, or if it'll be just shared with the below shop, or if there's,
We are not at that level.
you didn't get that far. Okay, that's fine.
So there are procedures and regulations
Okay.
that would probably
Okay. And then my other comment, again, on the unit size of housing for year-round people. My sister lives in probably something under 400 square feet, and her vacuum cleaner and cleaning supplies live in her bathtub, and every single time she wants to take a shower, she has to take them out of the bathtub because there really isn't that much storage in a unit that small. And I don't know if anybody else here has had experience trying to live in a unit that small, and I thought it was like a good example of, think about how much space your vacuum cleaner takes, your mop, your bucket, your broom, and then try and fit that into a space with like your shoes and your books and your coats and so I will always be very interested in making sure that a single person in a unit has enough space to live their life in a way that isn't absolutely maddening. And also, because housing is so tight, I have concerns about overcrowding in smaller units, because that is what people will have access to. So I do also have this assumption that even if it's a smaller unit and maybe it's meant for one person, you might end up with 2 people in it, or you might end up with 3 people in it. And just to keep that in everybody's mind when we consider that. And I don't super want to go back to like tenement housing of why we have such small units in New York City for thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's because people lived in substandard conditions. And I really don't want to go back to that. But I do see your point that there is a space for if you are coming here to work for 12 weeks and you're spending 60 to 70 hours of your week working, you probably just need a clean place to have a bed and maybe make some food. So that's my small housing spiel. Won't be the last time you hear it.
Jamie?
Just a quick question on pre-existing non-conforming, because I think that at the end of all of this, I think a lot of this is going to be really acceptable to most of the people in town, but I think that's going to be, as I'm sure you're well aware. And I was curious if you had any kind of like protocol or something set up into place to give yourself guardrails and parameters as people start to come in with those concerns. Like, is there a program in place so that when that does start happening, that you have some kind of support structure built into this plan?
Well, I don't think I mentioned this, but in the change in the procedural would be that a preliminary staff meeting is required before filing. And so that would be the first piece where we identify if there's any issues and discuss what, what the reality of the project might be and changes to scope and kind of work through that.
So that will be required.
Yeah, that would be a change. I mean, we encourage it now, but we're basically saying that because, again, these things, commercial properties, mixed use, they get complicated. They have a lot of moving parts, so we at least want to make sure that, so that someone doesn't just fill out an application, they're already on an agenda, and then they're
Already halfway
on their way to
there.
planning board.
Yeah.
And they've already got plans drawn up, they've spent a lot of time and money with architects and everything, and we don't want that to happen. So I guess that's the first, that's the proposal we have, right?
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that helps tremendously having that initial meeting, so.
Well, the one question on the 100 feet back for a 39-foot, is that off Route 6 or is that off of any street?
Any border of the property?
Well, it's not allowed in it's not allowed in core commercial, so it would be everything else. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just trying, it's off Route 6 and off the primary roads, yes.
Off the primary roads, because I was thinking at Holmes Road, some of them, it looks like you got a road behind and a road in front. I don't know if you could ever get a 39-footer in there. That's all.
Yeah.
Just looking at how that fits, just curious.
Well, that would be core commercial though, right? It wouldn't matter.
On where, I'm sorry, where did you,
Homes.
on Holmes Road would be trade park, yeah.
So, with,
Oh, that's right, tree park.
I mean, we're presuming that this is industrial or trade with options at the top of the shop here. There is a large piece of undeveloped, very large piece, which could be more trade shop, but there is a corner over here. How many acres, Paul? It's pretty large. It bumps up to the campground, and it bumps up to the electrical, the easement here. There's a big chunk of land. So there is a sort of a place that could be a future multifamily development. And if the road was coming off Route 6, it would have access both ways and presumably new sidewalks and roadways so that it's more accessible.
Is that zoned for the 35 and 39-foot height in that area though? Because that's trade park.
Yes.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
And there would be space to set back there? Okay.
yeah, well, it depends how it's,
How it's made?
depends how it's built out.
Yeah.
So this is,
Pretty back there.
yeah, I mean, this is showing a hypothetical where you could actually subdivide that large lot, make lots with secondary roads going back, or these could just be driveways.
Right.
So it depends on how it gets,
Right.
how the owner wants to use it and how it gets divided.
Yeah.
And I don't think I mentioned, but, one of the changes of the use table is allowing the mixed-use multifamily would be by special permit in the trade park. Because again,
Right,
we think
street.
these things are compatible, but it's not, it takes some thought, so we just don't want people to start throwing up apartment building, for two reasons, the compatibility and the site design, but we also don't want to eat up all of our very limited industrial trade space.
Yeah, because.
So it's a special permit
Too,
to
yeah.
give, to make sure these things just don't, it doesn't get all eaten up, and we can look at it again, and this is part of, the master planning effort to look at this holistically, but.
Yeah, one other question on the pre-existing, the legacy, looking at Route 6 and the curb cuts. So those curb cuts are pre-existing now, and so unless they change or the landowner agrees, I mean, we're a landowner, some of it, but a landowner agrees, those curb cuts will remain where they are. And do we need the state to do anything on curb cuts?
So,
remain, but, no, go ahead.
well, so how it might play out is that depending on the scale of the project you're going to do, you might be required to, if you have more than one curb cut, to close off curb cut, consolidate and rechange and alter your access and circulation so that it's coming through one curb cut, which you may not have planned to do. May not want to do, but these are the things that we're never going to get the changes because multiple curb cuts are not, I mean, they're dangerous and they add to the.
I agree.
Yeah, so, but unless there's, and this is the piece that we haven't been able to really get a lot of forward motion on that because, and so this is the change, like, if you want to do a small project, you may not have to do that depending on what it is, and you might just do minor site plan, you can draw up your own plan, gets approved administratively, if you have one curb cut already, and if you aren't putting any more parking in the front, or whatever, but it depends. So if you have more than two curb cuts, one of the things, you're gonna have to consolidate. If you have parking in the front, you're gonna have to move some component of the
Right.
parking to reduce. Again, so it's not saying, it's a balance. It's not saying you gotta redo the whole lot and move all your parking. And this gets down into real nuts and bolts stuff because some properties, and you can imagine, they don't have any room. There's literally nowhere to move the parking.
Right.
And how do we deal with that? So it's not a perfect situation, but my feeling, I've wrestled with this, and what I came up with was that unless we have some teeth in the bylaw that says you're gonna have to make these changes, we're not gonna see the type of improvements we want. And so, again, not moving, the parking and landscaping is really gonna be the big things, because, and again, I'm telling you this because I'm the one that's gonna have these discussions.
Yeah.
And frankly, you're all gonna hear about it, so I wanna make sure, that's why we want to talk about this.
So
Got to move the parking, you got to add some landscaping, you weren't planning on that, I got a shoestring budget. These are all things that are difficult to deal with in a small town, where we want to be supportive, we don't want to, we want the projects to happen.
So the people who have existing businesses and would like to do a project that's larger than a small site plan review, they can expect primarily to be asked about the parking and the landscaping, but not necessarily something larger like move the building.
In terms of, if they want to expand the building, maybe yes. Like they can't do the top of the shop housing and keep everything else. the same.
That's an important point. So we don't want to award the bonuses to a project that is going to do the bare minimum and then not achieve the rest
Right.
of the vision. So I'm going to add a second floor for top of the shop housing, that's good, but then I'm not doing anything to improve the parking or the landscape or whatever else it might be. So the compliance piece, depending on what these bonuses are going to require you to do more. But at the same time, you're going to have expanded capacity on your property. You're going to be adding housing. You're going to be increasing your revenue stream, having rental or expanding. And again, and I'll bring this back to these new roadways, especially the Brackett Road to Tea Time connection. All those properties run back. You have you have expanded capacity, so you want to keep your property intact, but now you got two frontages. You want to subdivide it off. We don't require minimum lot sizes. So depending on how your lots, you may only have a small piece on the back if that roadway comes through. Whatever you can develop that, if it meets the setbacks and your site coverage limits, maybe it's a townhouse, maybe it's an ice cream stand, but you have capacity to do more with that property. And so that's a big piece. So it's like a trade-off. So I'm saying we're going to have hard discussions about people thinking about their property improvements, but we're also building into these things some chances to really, again, diversify your revenue.
Yeah.
What you could do with the property, have options.
I think it's great. I just wanted to clarify that it'll be kind of proportional to the level of improvement that you're trying to make, so that a business that's like trying to just like add a patio isn't gonna be like, you need to move your entire building.
Correct, yeah,
It'll be like,
yeah.
just in the event that anyone
When I
had
say
that
that
anxiety.
the minimum standards are really, do you have the minimum landscaping
Right.
along your frontage? If you already do, that's great, no issue. Are you adding, if you planned on adding more parking, you're not gonna be able to do that unless it's gonna be to the side or the rear. If you have more than one curb cut, you're gonna consolidate. And again, this is not moving everything, but redo it. I mean, some of these lots, you only have 5 spaces. We gotta work with you. I mean, what can you do? Can you reduce it by 1, add a little bit, add 100 square feet more of some landscaping to make the entrance and the curb cut better? It's these little things, again, with the little projects, the incremental change. Some of these properties are gonna get redeveloped wholesale, and that's a lot easier to do, because the way to think about this form-based code, it's a recipe. Look at the charts, the building sizes, the height limits, the architectural detail, the parking. If you follow the recipe, the
And there's
review process will be
interest-
easier.
There's interest locally in the people who already own their properties in redeveloping them. Like, there's local people who,
I mean, we just think that people have owned properties for a long time that are, you know, the useful life of the property is starting, and they're gonna be at a decision point of, do I
Right.
redevelop or do I sell? I mean,
Right.
I think those are gonna happen a lot
right,
over the next several years. And it's more like saying, if we can codify the vision that we want, put it in place now, so every project that comes down the road, the town isn't having to react to every parcel and every design or aspiration, that we sort of have the ground rules. And again, some of the questions here, I would reiterate this notion of this group, if this passes, I think this group should come together to do some work about hypotheticals. How do we procedurally do this? Because I think it'd be very important for the town to be unified in terms of this. And you can't plan out every single detail, but some big,
Definitely some known
Big-
hypotheticals, I think.
there's some things you can do.
great time to do it.
Dave?
Yeah, my question is kind of based on the form standards that we're going to do. Like, so if we're going to codify these form standards into town zoning bylaws for this particular district, I mean, what kind of teeth are we talking about with this? Like, is a project going to be not approved until they conform with the form standards, or are we opening ourselves as a planning board up to what we do in residential areas, where it's just the interpretation of the property owner and the lawyer, and how good they can like fit their arguments through those loopholes that we have in our zoning bylaws? So it's really kind of one of those questions where it's like, you know, am I just going to keep, you know, continuing my motion until you guys cave or I sue the town? Are we opening ourselves up to that type of liability? Or is this going to actually have teeth where it's like, unfortunately, this is what is written in the bylaws and you must conform in order to have an approval?
The proposals, you have to follow, you gotta follow the recipe. You gotta do the design standards. There's some very limited, you know, waivers and some flexibility, but most of it is pretty strict. But again, it sets the expectation that follow the recipe. Yeah.
And the other point is.
And we're communicating that up front. So, and again, the preliminary meeting, like, that's an important piece. So you come in, it's like, here's the checklist. If you're not meeting these things, there's no point going to planning board, because, you know, so we're trying to set the expectations. We really don't want people to go and spend time, money on all these plans when they're not ready.
I mean, they're going to anyways. But, you know,
Yeah, we're trying to minimize it, but
Paul, do you envision that the back half of this book be part of the town warrant? Is that what you're saying? What are we going to be voting on?
no, what would be in the warrant is the middle section, the actual bylaw.
Okay.
Where you see the strikeouts in the blue wording.
Okay.
And there'll be some preceding language with
Everybody
intent.
has different colors.
So we have 83 pages of zoning for the warrant?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the writing.
Yeah,
So I want,
Writing.
Yeah, it's almost
I wanna get-
half of what it was.
I mean, but that's what
Okay.
it is.
I'm just
right now.
asking.
This
Well-
will be the second time.
This would be the second time we have to do this,
Yeah.
I know.
Okay, just curious.
Joanne, I just want to follow up on what Mary said a little bit ago. I think it's going to be very important as we go down this path, that all of the boards that are involved in talking with the people who are wanting to make changes and getting the permits and the approvals and so forth. I think it's going to be extremely important that we stick together as boards, that once we all understand the parameters of the new changes, that we all agree we're gonna stick tight to those regulations. We won't be unpleasant, but if this plan has a chance at all, it's going to depend on us, because people sometimes go from board to board, place to place, person to person, and we're the wall that they're going to have to try to get through. So if we agree and we have more follow-up meetings like this, and we understand one another and what our position in the whole larger picture is, I think it would be very helpful.
I agree.
Just have a little, I realize that this was focusing on the central business district and the future plans for that. But I would call your attention to farming and agriculture use in the town at some point. And also the fact that the BRICS protocol calls for high-speed rail to Hyannis and then normal rail down here. Now, we don't know where those tracks are going to be laid, but if, this is a perfect kind of brief summary of what we want to do with the central business district. We can kind of integrate these ideas, which are in the future, into that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly talking to the state about public transit with busing and things like that. But that's not, the rail is not part of that.
Thanks.
There were some questions in the chat.
Oh, there were? Okay.
Yeah, well, this is compliment.
That was Michelle from Planning Board had it drop off. She sends her thanks. I think that was it, right? Just some messages.
I would like to thank our two presenters. I think you've done a phenomenal job here.
Thank you. I'll say it again, though. It's a group effort, and the task force, they've been at it for a number of years.
Yes, they have. They've done a wonderful job.
So my thanks to them. I wouldn't be able to do this without
Big thanks
that
to
group.
the
So,
task force.
Yeah.
so I won't keep you any longer. I'll be here at any questions, but we will have a public info session here on the 26th.
The whole schedule we've handed you, because there'll be multiple sessions, so,
Please attend.
please attend.
So one thing we didn't mention was that we really need people to advocate for this, that it needs two-thirds
Yes.
approval at town
Yes.
meeting.
Yeah.
And for all of us to understand, there's significant changes when we talk about density of housing, height of housing, but all of it is very nuanced, as you've just seen over the past 2 hours. So for everyone in this room to dig down into the materials we've been given to fully understand. So when someone says, oh, I hear we're going to have tiny apartments, or I hear we're going to have these 3, 4-story buildings, that you can correct them and say, actually, in certain situations, we think it's going to work well for the town, for instance. So we're going to have to be advocating for this. There's a lot of misinformation out there, as we all know, and a lot of work. As Paul said, this is up to 10 years' worth of work to get to this point. The investments that we've made in Tea Time and Town Plaza. You mentioned earlier someone said about the pre-existing. The town is a big player here, as we all know. And before we put these properties out to RFP, this needs something very close to this needs to be put in place, so.
And keep in mind that this is still only a very small part
Piece
of
of
town.
town, yeah.
I don't know the exact numbers or percents, but 90% of the town that's residential, there's no change.
Yeah.
It's still exactly what it was yesterday and tomorrow and the next day.
Are you guys planning to make a little cheat sheet possibly of,
We have a Q&A, we have the report, and we have all this material, and I think the goal was, we wanted to brief here, and then I think everything's going on the town website.
okay,
We're gonna do outreach to sort of Provincetown Independent. We have like another nine presentations to be made.
Yes.
Open for, and again, let's make this iterative. If people are getting a wave of questions, please reach out, probably to Paul, but, both of us.
So you know what they are,
So you can, we know what the questions are and we can respond to them if there's concerns. I will say one thing. With rental housing, because we actually had a conversation. There are local contractors who don't want to do rental housing. They don't want to be in that business. And having sponsored rental housing, I understand there's ups and downs on that. I think I would say a few things about this. First of all, some of the real concentration on rental housing is in the center of this district. There's going to be opportunities. 90% of the town is not going to be part of this zoning, so there's going to be opportunities. But this one developer was interesting. He is the general contractor with HEC, okay? So HEC is putting the financing together. HEC is doing all the rental modifications, whatever. He's a local contractor who's building it. He's going to make a profit on that. He may not make as much profit because he doesn't have an equity stake in the project, but he's going to have that work to do. So I don't think this excludes local people. They can partner with developers, they can come in as the general contractor. As I said, I think anyone with a construction business, I'd be thinking about septic systems myself, just given the volume of work. And then there's still going to be 90% of the town that, with almost 60% of the properties being over 50 years old, this is going to happen. I mean, things are just, because of age, are going to start redeveloping. And the other point about that is, if you've got a lot of redevelopment going on in the residential district and 2 or 3 of these big commercial properties start popping, the planning board's going to have a lot of work. And I mean, just the staff, we've tried to build in some capacity things, administrative reviews, peer reviews, some things that would offset that, but I just think that's a reality. Again, maybe in, a post-town meeting, that's one of the capacity things that we might want to talk about, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you all.
Thank you.